Hi, good evening everyone. Vanakkam. Thank you so much for joining with us today. The topic COVID and sustainable development. Yes, we have Miss Priya Maria. She's an author in 17th and also she's a lawyer. Priya, very good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, thank you so much, Priya, for probably taking up a session which is probably related to the sustainable development as well. So it's high time you go on starting this session.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. So let's start. COVID has hit us terribly in ways unimaginable. It has affected every sector of our economy, every section of our society, every religion, every state, every human being. Over the past few months, you would have come across news reports that broadcasted and highlighted the harsh reality of our country, India. COVID did not discriminate between the rich and the poor. It affected us all, it affects us all. However, the amount of suffering, trauma, injustice that was faced by the various sections of the society cannot be determined through mere words. In today's webinar, our focus will be on sustainable development, which is all the more important, especially as we face this pandemic situation. So, what is sustainable development? In simple terms, sustainable development means meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising with the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. Commenting on sustainable development, the former president of the World Bank, James D. Wilkinson, observed, "It is for us to think as to what kind of world we want. Do we want to bequeath a world for our future generation, a poorest world wherein innumerable people die of hunger, climate uncertainty, biodiversity at its lowest ebb, and social conditions most unstable?" This observation of Wilkinson clearly shows that the central focus of sustainable development is not confined to the present happiness of the people, but it also expands to the safeguarding the interests of the coming generations. When we say the word need, as human beings, our basic needs for sustenance are good quality air to breathe, clean drinking water, nutritional food, and a roof over our head. Today, however, with the overwhelming rate of environmental degradation, these basic needs itself has become a commodity of luxury. From air purifiers to aquaguards, packaged mineral water, and adulterated food. If we go back to our, olden times, to the generation of our grandparents, mostly India was an agrarian population. The use of pesticides and insecticides was not even there, if I'm not wrong. We use natural manures, fertilizers, compost, cow dung, all those things. Today, if we desire to go healthy and choose the healthy lifestyle and to buy unadulterated food items, we would have to pay huge amounts of cash. That is the irony of life, that naturally available products have become more expensive than the adulterated or let's say manufactured ones. While we are still facing the pandemic, a new thinking emerges to manage nature and its resources. So far, our policy response to the COVID-19 outbreak has been based on the principle of safe living. However, we need to expand our thinking and we need to think forward, because we need to think about our future generation also. This is where sustainable development comes into picture. Sustainable development involves a multifaceted approach, that is, economic, human, environmental, and technological. It is a process which seeks to bring improvement in the quality of human life along with conservation of the ecological system. Thus, development and environment both are interdependent, and therefore there cannot be development without protection of environment, nor can there be conservation of environment without development. The former UN General Secretary Kofi Annan had identified 5 areas for the applicability of the principle of sustainable development. They are water, health, power and energy, agriculture, and biodiversity. The former Prime Minister of India, Srimati Indira Gandhi, had categorically stated in her address at the Stockholm Conference 1972 that water, air, land, soil, plant, trees, and living organisms must be preserved because they are valuable natural resources for the benefit of the future generations. Now, there are few very important principles of sustainable development which I'll be dealing with next. There are 8 principles of sustainable development, and these principles have got to be necessarily followed in order to achieve the objective of sustainable development. Let's look at these principles. Number 1, the intergenerational equity. The principle of intergenerational equity presupposes the right of each generation of human beings to benefit from cultural and natural resources of the past generation, as well as the obligation to preserve such heritage for future generations. It is based on the principle that man has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of quality that permits a life of dignity and well-being, and he bears a solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environment for the present and future generations. The natural resources of the earth, including the air, water, lands, flora, and fauna, and especially representative samples of natural ecosystems, must be safeguarded for the benefit of the present and future generations through careful planning and management as appropriate. The second principle, use and conservation of natural resources. This principle requires that Earth's natural resources should be carefully used in such a way that they may be conserved and enhanced for the future generations. It must be borne in mind that natural resources are already depleting due to poverty, overpopulation, urbanization, industrialization, etc., and there is likely to be acute shortage of these resources in future. Therefore, there is dire need to develop techniques and technologies which may need minimum utilization of natural resources. The principle of use and conservation of resources is founded on the theory that the present generation should be modest in their exploitation of natural resources for the benefit of the future generations. As I mentioned earlier, our needs are very basic, but our wants are plenty. So we need to differentiate between our needs and our wants. The third principle, environmental protection. In India, Environmental Protection Act of 1986 is the central legislation which provides various rules and regulations that everyone, every Indian citizen, every factory, everybody has to follow and adhere to. Emphasizing the need of protection of environment for life of the people, the Supreme Court had observed that while the courts have a social responsibility in the matter of protection of environment, there should be proper balance between the same and development activities, which are essential for progress. There can be no dispute that the society has to prosper, but it shall not be at the expense of environment. In the like vein, the environment shall have to be protected, but not at the cost of the development of the society. Both development and environment shall coexist and go hand in hand, and balance has to be struck, and administrative actions ought to proceed in accordance therewith. For example, in India, it is mandatory that 1/3 of the forest area, 1/3 of the land area of India should have forest cover. But because of industrialization, we are facing deforestation. So when we talk about sustainable development, if you cut a tree, I would say you plant 2 more trees. The fourth principle, precautionary principle. Precautionary principle is widely recognized as a measure to fight against illness in health regime. People generally avoid to eat fatty or fibrous food, consume tobacco or alcohol, etc. They generally undertake regular morning walks or physical exercise as a precautionary measure to avoid illness. The precautionary principle in the context of environmental protection is essentially about the management of scientific risk. According to this principle, where there is threat of serious or irreversible environmental damage, lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent environmental degradation. In other words, any human activity or behavior which bears the harmful effect to the environment has got to be prevented at all costs. For example, we have a habit of using plastics. We consume a huge amount of plastics despite the fact that plastics are harmful for the environment. If you visit the landfill areas of Mumbai or anywhere near your locality, you would see the amount of garbage, the amount of dump that is, discharged in landfills, in rivers, everywhere. We are polluting our air, water, soil, everything. Precautionary principle may be considered as a strategy for the implementation of sustainable development. That is, in order to achieve the goal of sustainable development, precaution has to be taken that today's available resources are preserved for future generations. The fifth principle, that is Polluters Pay Principle. Polluters Pay Principle was considered to be one of the best methods for prevention of environmental pollution. But there were practical difficulties in working out an exact definition of the principle, as there could be dispute as to the limits on payment for damages caused and exact scope of the applicability of principle. In Research Foundation for Science versus Union of India, in this case, the Apex Court observed that the polluters pays principle basically means that the producer of goods or other items should be responsible for the cost of preventing or dealing with any pollution that the manufacturing process causes. This includes environmental cost incurred in avoiding pollution and not just those incurred on remedy for the damage or are immediately tangible. Therefore, this principle should not be misunderstood to mean that the polluter can be allowed to cause damage and made to pay the same. The nature and extent of cost shall, however, differ from case to case depending upon the circumstances of the case. I'm sure you all must have heard of MC Mehta. He had filed a large number of public interest litigations with regard to environmental degradation. So whenever we say, MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath, MC Mehta versus Union of India, it is based on the PIL's public interest litigation filed by him on various environmental degradation and other aspects. The sixth principle, the principle of liability to help and cooperate. The state should cooperate to strengthen indigenous capacity building for sustainable development by improving scientific understanding through exchanges of scientific and technological knowledge and by enhancing the development, adaptation, diffusion, and transfer of technologies, including new and innovative technologies. So basically, we need technology, we need scientific research, and these should go hand in hand to improve our environment and to have a sustainable development. The seventh, and I believe is the most important principle, poverty eradication. Poverty is perhaps the worst contributing factor for polluting the environment and causing its degradation. Our former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who addressed the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment in 1972, said, "Of all pollutants we face, the worst is poverty." India being a developing country, it's more than 30% people are living below the poverty line. The pitiable condition of slum dwellers, scarcity of food, fuel, kerosene, oil, etc. are serious threats for environment. Due to lack of residential houses, crores of poor men, women, and children are compelled to live in slums and even on roadside temporary huntmen in the most unsanitary conditions without sufficient food and water. And we know that in this how much that has affected these poor people. Thus, they have to live in unwholesome environmental conditions. Therefore, India needs cooperation and assistance from the developed countries to help and support the poverty alleviation program and maintenance of wholesome environmental conditions. The eighth principle, the principle of public trust. The principle of public trust is based on the assumption that natural resources like air, water, sea, forest, being the gift of the nature, should be freely available for use to everyone as there can be no private ownership on these resources. The principle of trust enjoins a duty upon the state to protect these natural resources for the benefit and enjoyment of the general public and to permit private ownership and not to permit private ownership over them. These days we see so many private beaches and all those things. The doctrine of public trust presupposes that the state holds natural resources as a trustee for the benefit of the people who are the real beneficiaries of this natural resource property. Therefore, the state, that is the government, is under an obligation to hold it on behalf of the people and especially for the benefit of the future generation. The natural resources, whether renewable or non-renewable, have immense ecological value. Every person who exercises his right to use natural resources like air, water, land has a duty to make a sustainable use of them so as to make sure that others are not deprived of their similar right of use and it does not adversely affect the environment and the ecosystem. So I remember when this COVID pandemic hit us few months back, I was in Pune actually, and situation was very bad. Groceries were unavailable, but luckily we had a garden. My mother, she had planted brinjals, coriander, and everything. So we were self-sustained. Even our Prime Minister Modi, he also, emphasized the need to grow our own food items, essential items, crops, maintain a kitchen garden. Also, if you're building houses, please make sure that your houses have, rainwater harvesting system in them so that you don't have water shortage when your public taps or whatever runs out of water. So these are the little ways that you can think to improve the future generation. Also, I once wrote an article about water conservation. How to use flush tank. If you fill a plastic bottle with pebbles and put in your flush tank, the amount of water that discharges while you're flushing will be less as compared to not using it. And while you're washing your utensils, keep a separate basin for washing your dishes, all those little things. I'm sure you're in your homes, your mothers, your wives, your daughters, your sons, your husbands would be aware of these things. Any questions? Did I bore you all so much that you all slept off? Okay, cool. While they're thinking on those notes, let me move on. So what needs to be prioritized or added to the existing principle of sustainable development. First, we must have a high quality forest cover. As I said before, in India, the national goal is to ensure that one third of the total land area is under forest or tree cover. In addition, attention must also be paid to ensuring that forest cover is maintained sustainably. Can you hear me now? What part of, I mean, you didn't hear anything that I said? Okay. I was saying that we need to maintain a very good forest cover with medicinal trees, and we need to cultivate spices, medicinal plants, agricultural horticultural crops, dairy and other agriculture related activities on the farm itself. And we need to have smart cities and villages, better planning. I was hoping for a discussion, I was hoping to hear the views of the listeners, I was hoping to get their inputs as to their ideas of sustainable development, what they are doing at their homes. Like Surya, as you know, I'm done. All it takes is 20 minutes for me to give a lecture. I really don't like to bore people with 1 hour of webinar. Just like the last Harry Potter thing, I don't know, I wanted to finish it off in 20 minutes, it extended. I prefer discussion rather than me giving lecture. Because if I go on talking about laws, Environmental Protection Act, Water Act, Air Act, there's a lot and there's loads of subtopics in it. So I don't want to bore you with that. So I was hoping for a healthy discussion, like what are the different things you're doing, how is your experience during COVID, what are the difficulties you faced. Yeah, share your views. You have the right to liberty. No, I'm not able to see the chat. Okay. Better we do integrated farming. It's like growing crops along with cattle, cows, and goats. We earn an extra profit with it, or we can add some honeybees comb to earn some money. It's better to be a sustainable agriculture we do ourselves. Yes, very good point, Sibi. No, natural honey is so much more better than Dabur honey. Oh, oh yeah. Yes, so I am from Kerala and I am in Kerala. So we have a farm where we have cows, goats, hens, ducks. So we get our own milk and the cow dung is used as manure. We have our like, bananas, our jackfruits and all those things, crops. We have a kitchen garden. Basically, my father and mother have green fingers. Yes, in my house there is a big pond with fishes also in that. So the government of Kerala gives subsidies for those who want to, go forward with this. So yes, my family is doing that also. Maybe I should ask my father to, come and give another webinar on those. Yeah, but apart from knowledge, we need, land also, certain basic resources also. We need investment also for that. What is KVK program, Sibi? Can you please elaborate us on that? These are statutes. The Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. So for everything, we have an act, and these act gives us guidelines. Certain laws and regulations are there. about how to manage, how to maintain the environment. The government has enacted rules how to, like, for the industries, like they are not supposed to discharge their toxic waste directly into the river without proper, clear, without proper management. They're not supposed to dump waste just like that. So all these things are discussed thoroughly in these acts. So there is Act for Water, Act for Air, Biodiversity, everything, Forest Act. Yeah, so the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981 does provide with certain, guidelines. So the laws are there, but implementation is not there. So yeah. Yes. If these things are violated, there will be penalties, there will be procedures, like whoever destroys or pulls down, removes, injures, or defaces any pillar, post, so they will be, held liable in the court of law. So, for every damage, there is a remedy in the court of law, and for every damage, there is also a penalty. It will take time, and it will take joint action from the youth, our present generation. We need to, take an active role. As Sibi says, she's an horticulturist, even she can study and she can, bring out innovative ideas. So each one of us has a equal responsibility and an obligation, a duty to protect our environment. So I believe you're an engineer, Surya. Even you can, focus on developing some innovative technologies that could go hand in hand with sustainable development. Yeah, I mean, I am a lawyer. I can just give you the laws. I can just tell you what should be done and should not be done. But then you have to use your brain and, think about innovative ideas. Let's just end this session. It's going to be 6 o'clock. I'm sure these people have better things to do than to listen to me rant and, lecture on sustainable development. Thank you so much, Surya, for having me. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you for your patience and time.